Coming up next on the Wet Fly Swing podcast.
If it has some soul to it, I can get away with a shank, or if I see a ledge that I want to drop off and get into a bucket, I will use a shank even with some weight on it. But if it's more of a classic that I've got time to set up and then the hang down is going to be really lazy, that an unweighted tube fly, it just stays like up in their zone rather than laying on the bottom like a shank would. It's not like a West Coast, your rivers have soul right to the bank. So it's sort of a different thought process.
That was Jeff Liskay sharing his take on the tube versus the shank. Chrome Bright Steelhead swinging with compact spey rods, and the Steelhead School today on The Swing.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Hey, how you doing today? Thanks for stopping by the show. Would be amazing if you had a chance to share a past episode from this podcast, or maybe this one, if it works out for you. This is the best way we know of getting the word out for this podcast and helping fellow anglers out there. So if you get a chance, in most apps, down the bottom, there's a little arrow button, likely. Click it and click that share button. And copy that link, share it out on text, email, whatever works for you. Thanks in advance if you had a chance to share a past episode. Today's episode is sponsored by Dalton at Country Financial, who thrives on helping families and community members through the power of education and proper insurance coverage. The unexpected will happen, so it's always best to make sure your assets and life are protected. You can check out Dalton right now at wetflyswing.com/country and make sure you are protected today. Today's episode is sponsored by Eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton Territory, Idaho's most renowned zone for fly fishing, from the Henry's Fork to the South Fork of the Snake and all the high alpine lakes and streams in between. Yellowstone Teton Territory provides anglers and other outdoor enthusiasts with all the information they need to plan their next big trip. You can visit wetflyswing.com/Teton right now to get the full list of outfitters, lodges, fly shops, and all kinds of inspiration to get you started on your next trip to Eastern Idaho. That's Teton, Teton, wetflyswing.com/Teton. Jeff Liskay is back on the podcast to take us back into some tips on swinging flies for Lake Erie steelhead. We find out which spey casting tips Jeff gave me on our trip to Ohio, which were huge to keep me rolling along. We also get the lowdown on the plan for next year's Steelhead School trip, how that's going to be changing. We might be hitting multiple locations, multiple states, maybe even. And we get a wrap up from our guests on the school event at the Fireside Chat with Dave. This was a fun time. Sat around the campfire, under the stars, at the cabin, and we basically talk about what it was all about at the end of this episode. That's a good, pretty cool piece. And we haven't broken out that chat for a while, so this is definitely going to be fun to listen to it again. So without further ado, here we go. Jeff Liskay from GreatLakesFlyFishing.com. Well, how's it going, Jeff?
Great, Dave, man. Always good to hear your voice.
Yeah, this is pretty fun because we've been talking a lot about the trip, and we've been talking a lot on, like this and on the phone. And then to be, in person, we met up and fished for basically a week. We were there for a little less than a week and had an amazing trip. And yeah, it's pretty cool. It's more than pretty cool because it's like we connected, and I think the group connected. And yeah, what's your take on, the trip? When you look back at I think we had 4 days there, it seems to me like it was a major success. How's it look to you?
It was a major success. And I'll go on record to let all the listeners know that you're super humble when you say I can't cast or can't fish, because just to let everybody know, Dave is a badass angler. And he says he can't cast a two-handed rod, but that's just him being humble. But other than that, I think it was a great success. We had our expectations of, oh my goodness, Mother Nature was going to give us a kick in the stomach, but it absolutely turned out to be picture perfect day in, day out. And the rivers were declining, and so we were able to catch multiple rivers. So I think that was the key, to have everybody explore a little bit of what can actually happen on the South Shores of Erie.
That's right. Yeah, it was awesome because we were a little worried. We got there and I had a big thing with my check bag, which was lost. And that made it kind of interesting the first day. So we were scrambling the first day, but I get it's like all these trips. There's always something that goes on, right? So it's just kind of dealing with that. We got over that hump, and then we got there, and everybody there. We're going to give a shout out at the end. We did a little fireside chat with Dave, is what my friends jokingly call it. But we did a little microphone pass around the fire, which again was the perfect deal. We were out there under the stars with a campfire in the backyard at the cabin. So yeah, I can't say enough. I want to dig into a little bit on, what we covered there, how we fished, and then we'll have a little bit of probably some more stories as we go here. But let's just start with the gear right away, because you just got off this trip, a kind of a photo shoot with SA. We had a photographer out, Kendrick. Shout out to Kendrick. He was amazing. He went over and above and captured a bunch of photos. And so we have all this stuff. But what was that? So SA, the gear, you guys were kind of spotlighting their new gear, which is the lines we used on the trip, right?
Yeah, correct. Everybody has their own favorite Skagit line. And then as the industry goes, does this full circle and try to always reinvent the wheel, the lengths of these Skagit heads sort of match what the rod companies are sort of putting forth for us to, fish. And some of the newer, I would say newer in the lineups have been like a crossover spey or basically like a short spey where the rod's a little shorter, but the grain window is going to be traditionally like a standard two-handed graining, not a switch rod. So we were playing around with the new Skagit short, super compact, super short, and it basically takes over from the Spey Light series and starts like in the low 400s, and then it goes up into the high. It's just like a big payload delivery. And a lot of this too, Dave, is cultivating from like the king salmon swing up on your end, where you need to just turn over like logging chain T18, T20 with intermediate heads to get down. So that was a sort of a request from the West Coast. And then we're sort of, utilizing it, as you can see, around my area, because it gets blown out in big flies. And it's just another one of those arrows in our quivers that, you might need to get that head if you're thinking about that type of fishing.
Yeah, that's it. So it was the Skagit short. And I love that you said the king salmon, because we got George Cook coming back on, and we're going to talk to him here in a few weeks. Actually, I think it's next week, a week from today. We're going to dig into Alaska kings. We're going to focus on some king fishing because we got some trips coming up next year on that. So we're going to probably talk about some of these lines a little more. But so for the Skagit, so we have the Skagit short, and let's talk a little bit. I want to just cover the basics of the gear and like even flies, because we had, conditions. To me, sometimes you went up to those rivers and you looked at them and you're like, wow, they look like they're pretty turbid, pretty off color. And then you start fishing and realize that they're actually in pretty good shape. I mean, overall, talk about that. When do you guys fish? When is too clear and when is just right for that part of Ohio?
Yeah, so one of the issues is Ohio and all those southern streams are runoff streams. So the turbidity comes, of course, is when we get these, flushets of snow melt or rain. And one good thing is that we're learning, and I'm learning on a daily basis, of how much we can really push the envelope as far as like flow per cubic feet per second. So ideally, we want them as high as possible, because it puts those fish in those transient zones, not in the community pools. Like as you came in, you could see that, we were catching fish off of like flat shale shelves and wide out in the wide open. But then as the week progressed, they started gravitating more to the community pools within 2 or 3 days. But my ultimate would be like start out at 14 inches of visibility. And then right about when you can barely see your boots in knee deep water, that's when the window really opens up for us. It gives them a little more visibility. And then as the water keeps clearing, of course, they're going to start gravitating to more, like we saw, it's like, oh, they're going to be here. Where those first few days, we were probably fishing in areas that most people would walk by. So it's interesting how those runoff rivers, fish.
That's right. Yeah, the first spot we went to, we fished down, we started at the top and then fished down below and got into a little pod, right, down that pretty not super deep water. And they were fishing, they were right there and they were just like bam, bam, bam. And then we moved over, I think later that day, to another spot. Yeah, it was really cool to see, because I think my expectations, I didn't know what to expect. We had chatted about it, and it kind of blew me away because it was way more for me, even having years of steelhead fishing over here on the West. It's just an amazing spot. You guys have this, for those that don't know, I mean, I guess we're maybe trying to put Ohio on the map, at least from our community. But I mean, it is pretty amazing. I mean, it's legit for sure. If anybody asks me about steelhead fishing, I would say that is a spot you have to go fish, right? And I mean, I guess that's nothing new to you, right? You probably have a lot of people that are saying that. Are you getting that? Do you get people from, I mean, I know a lot of the crew that was there today or on our trip were from the Great Lakes. Do you get people coming from outside occasionally?
We do. Yep. A lot of the outfitters and myself, we get a lot of people reaching out. A lot of times they're coming into the area to visit family and they want to like test the waters. The hard part is navigating through this up and down river conditions. So that's the only thing that saves it. I mean, it's taken 20, 30 years to really like say, man, I got to like get a piece of this, but you could put a date on the calendar and it's not a guaranteed. And I think that protects the fishery. But working with the outfitter or the guide, whoever, if you do catch those magical days, you're like, oh my goodness, like this is on. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, especially on a swung fly. It's not your traditional bomb it out there. You can catch it from bank to bank. It's more of a, I would think, once you think, I call it more like technical swinging.
Yeah, exactly. It is technical swimming because you're sitting there and you're basically, same thing, down and across, but sometimes you're casting out. And I think of that one run. I mean, again, some stories because everybody had amazing stories, but I think of that one where we were on the big river, right? We were on the Grand, which is the bigger river. It was our first time fishing. And, I was bombing one out towards the other bank, trying to bomb it out there. And I swung it down. And I think, Jim, you guys were ahead down below or just below me. And I was swinging right behind Jim. He had come through there and I swung and I got a little tap. Right. It was like, oh, and I yelled out to you. I was like, hey, there's a tap. And it's funny because that's another thing I didn't think I was going to get out. Right. And over here, summer steelhead, anywhere you're going to get those taps and tips and little things. But so I got this and I knew it was because I'd felt that before, put it back on it and another tap. Right. And it was like, okay. And then I started second guessing myself. I said, wait a minute. Is that a shelf? Is it scraping across? Right. Put the same exact cast back towards the bank. I tried to punch it right against the bank, swung it, and boom, hook up, fish on. And I'm, screaming and hollering. You guys are coming up, and you get out there. Of course, you're there because you're on it. You got the net, and you get in. You're like, wow, that's a brown trout, right? And so, did that surprise you at all when you saw that as a brown trout?
It did. They're stocked in Pennsylvania, but they've been a little more frequent the last few years in Ohio now. So it surprised me. And at first I was like, what is it? Skipper, what is that? And all of a sudden I was like, nope, that's a legit brown trout, silver brown trout from Lake Erie. So I think we'll see more and more of those if Pennsylvania continues that stocking program. So it's pretty cool to see that overflow.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's finish that story. So I do that. And I went right back up and I can't remember if it was another cast or another two cast, but I hooked up again, pretty much the same spot. And it was a nice steelhead, right? It had some color on it, some nice red. You remember that moment?
I do. It was a double striped male, nice 8-pounder, maybe, solid 8-pound fish. And it fought. And you're like, at that point, I think you finally were like blown away about like what could possibly happen. Right. But behind the scenes, though, I was fishing in one of the other clients' pocket, and we were talking about a fly change. And I said, I don't mind you not changing, but I would like to maybe think about changing the fly to like maybe an orange or something, because we sort of figured out a little bit of orange was working. And next thing I know, I says, if he picks your pocket again, we're switching. Because he was extremely good, angler, right? So it was like, okay. And you picked his pocket twice, and it wasn't his skill set at all. It was a color thing. And it just goes to show you that, how you fish in partners, right? Working a rundown. It's like, you gave us the intel. It's like, nope, that we got to have that fly on today, or at least this run. Cool.
Right. And so why was that? So why was the orange? I think, I did have an orange on. Why that day was orange working over? I can't remember what Jim had on there. Maybe a darker one.
Yeah, Jim had the classic blue black, and he has a shank, and it was a little smaller in profile. It wasn't crystal clear, right? It had a little heartbeat, and he was getting the plucks. Like he went down through that run and got he's like, oh, there's one. We stepped back and did the traditional like give it to him again and angle of attack, and we tried all that, but it was just like they just weren't committing fully to that fly. So I was like, okay, but it was a beautiful fly. 9 times out of 10, that fly pie would have caught a fish. Now, was it because if we notice a lot of times in the Great Lakes, we have a little bulkier front of a fly to keep it swimming a little more. Was it the lead length of yours compared to his that we compared? But it was definitely the orange was one of the highlights that was in that, at least that day. Some type of orange was like a hot spot, just like the old days, right? A hot spot fly.
Yeah, that's it. Like egg sucking leech is your standard egg sucking leech. It pretty much works anywhere.
Right.
Yep, that's right. Nice. Okay. And so, yeah, fly selection, that's a good reminder, though, on this. So if you're not getting something, and well, I guess that's the thing, you swing down. I mean, what if we're in a run and this really didn't happen, I don't think, to us at all, which says a lot about your fishing there. But you're in a run and you don't get anything. There's no feedback, no fish, no touches, no. What are you thinking? Are you thinking, okay, is it my line right? Is it my fly? Are the fish here? What's your thought process there?
So usually my thought process is because, we love to say that we own all these rivers, but we're sharing it with a lot of other anglers now. It's my first thought process. If we're the first ones through the pool, I would say, hey, what's the water temperature, right? But generally speaking, we're going to only have a very few amount of the fish that are in that run that are players for the swung fly. And I would say that usually you go through, if one angler goes through, I usually like to go through twice. If it's two anglers, I'm pretty sure that mathematically that we have that water covered and they're just not going to bite. We might have to wait for the water to warm up a little bit, but once the day progresses and it's 11:30, 12, 1 o'clock, and we're going to start moving around the river, if you got getting a few plucks, or like you said, there's a high percentage that fish might have been caught and released the day before. Angling pressure comes into a lot of part of our area there. So I've experienced that the last few days. Now the water has cleared up. They're showing themselves, but they're not committing like they were last week.
Gotcha. There's a lot to think about. And the swung fly, again, goes back to that. Yeah, I mean, you could be doing other techniques. Like we saw some guys out there with eggs and center pin reels, right? And all sorts of different ways. So there's lots of ways to catch these and maybe get more fish, right? But we are swinging flies. I mean, we're getting down with these Skagit shorts, but we're swinging and we're not nymphing. And you also see guys swinging out in the area when the conditions are right. Are there quite a few guys nymphing out there with flies?
Yeah, I would think everybody sort of gravitates to the basic rule of thumb is I want to catch a fish, I want to catch a lot of fish, then I want to catch big fish. Then it's like, well, I got this game. What else is there to challenge me, right? And there is a huge following now of the swung fly in my area. I think it's a challenge for everybody to learn the casts and they can incorporate it using the nymphing techniques. Or, who says that you need to do it always like swing flies? You can pick up an indicator rod, catch a fish, and then swing flies in the afternoon. So it's a great tool to have, but I have seen a huge influx in the last 4 to 5 years of anglers, the swung fly approach, which is cool because they're not about the numbers anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's circle back around. I just want to wrap up the gear because I want to make sure we touch on that. So we got the Skagit short. Let's just talk about my set because you were kind enough to let me. This is a pretty amazing the week. You gave me your rod. So I'm fishing that. I got. I was using again. Shout out to Mike at Chagrin Outfitters. These guys were amazing guides. And Mike, I think it was like the third day he came up. He said, "Hey, why don't you try this rod?" He gave me this really sweet miser rod, right? That was just awesome, and I used that and caught a fish on it, right? And so we got all this great gear. What was the gear you gave me that I was using that had that Skagit short? And I think there was and the rod. I can't remember exactly what that was.
Yeah, so it was like a shorter spey. It was 11.5 foot, 7 weight Scott. And then, we gave you the click and paw, which was great. And then we were usually in the winter, basically the shooting line. I like to use mono, even though it's a little harder to hold. I use the mono because it just doesn't hold the water and get your gloves wet or in the cold.
Oh yeah.
It is a little more difficult. You have to stretch it out, of course, in the early morning to get that stretch, or hopefully a big fish to stretch it out, right? But there are drawbacks, but I sort of like it for manageability in the winter. And then at the end of the Skagit short, we were just running, depending on our flows, we were running the TC tips off the end of that.
Yeah, we were using. I think I was starting out with kind of the 10-foot tip. Let's talk about that just a little bit. So it was like a Sync 3.5. I can't remember what were we using. We started out with. We kind of adjusted it a little bit as we went. But what was that first line I was using, or the tip?
Yep. Generally speaking, when the flows are, over 400, you're going to need somewhere like we use a Sync 3, Sync 5. And the reason why we sort of use the 10-foot tips is anything under 12 foot of length of rod, you can get away with a 10-foot tip. And if you start getting over 12 foot, then you want the 12-foot tips. But we stayed with the 10-footers as our go-to, easy to cast. And then we did, that was like I would say the average pace water was a sink 3.5. Then when we got into a few runs that were a little more aggressive, we were fishing the straight sink 7. And if you noticed that there was two schools of thought process, was unweighted and weighted, I generally will prefer to be over tipped, meaning like a little heavier than normal with an unweighted fly so you can maneuver it and muscle it in and around, as you can see off those ledges like you talked about. But then once we got towards the middle or towards those greasier winter tailouts, then we dropped into sink 2, sink 4, which is my go-to most of the time. Is like when the flows are average. So we probably made 3 tip changes, I would say, the course of that, our 4 days there.
Yeah. And talk about, and is that the SA? I mean, there's a lot of different lines you can get, but SA has like a sink tip package, right? Is that what we were using there?
Yeah, absolutely. It starts at a floating, then it goes to sink 1, sink 2, then, 2, 4, 3, 5, and then sink 7. And you could also, break it down into any T material, but if you wanted to equate into T material, around 55 grains of tungsten T material, I don't care how you do it, that's for average flows. And then as the flows start getting up over 400, you want around 75 grains of tungsten. And then once they start getting up around 700, 750, in that area, you better start looking at least, 100, 120 grains of tungsten get you for wintertime fishing, which is not much, really.
Right. And what was this? So the equivalent would be on the T, like what would be, say, the T11? What would that be equal to in this series here with the SA stuff?
So the equivalent of T11 would be the sink 7, roughly about. And then you can add a little bit of weight here and there. Another cool little cheater I do too is if we can't quite get down, if you have a 10-foot of sink 7 and you're not quite down, rather than adding more tip on it, if you remember Randy, he had a full sinking Skagit intermediate. And so a lot of times, rather than wrestling with more like T14 or bigger flies, all we do is we add a intermediate sinking Skagit head and then add like a lighter tip to it to make it easier casting and stay down. So Randy he was fishing an intermediate head, and he was fishing intermediate sink 2, and he was catching, as you saw, just as well as Nicole did.
All right. That's right. So on that first day, he was using a intermediate sinking head and then a lighter tip. And then Nicole was using just a floating line with a heavier tip.
Correct. And they both caught fish. So you can play the game however you want, but I'm not the one to put, I try to keep as light as tip for castability and it's speed too, right? I think. Do you guys use much intermediate heads out west or no?
Yeah, I like intermediate. I think that it kind of breaks the surface and gets you down a little bit and kind of helps. Yeah, I do like those. And I'm not even sure, I've used so many different things, but that is an awesome tip. So in the SA, like you said, you can just go pick up that SA. What's that called? The SA tip? Is that just like a tip package they have?
Yes, it is. It's a TC tip package, and it comes in 10 or 12 foot.
Okay, there it is. So somebody, if they're listening, they can just go grab that. And that's the cool thing. So once you get that, you got that covered. So like you said, the 2-4, essentially describe that tip really quick. So what is that? So from the top, the line end to the leader end, what's that look like when you say 2-4 or 3-5? How is that? Because isn't there a floating section on that as well?
You could get that too. So we do have a float sink 7, but traditionally the inches per second. So that's the numerical part of the tip system. So the back half of which connects to your Skagit head sinks 2 inches per second. And then the front half is 4 inches per second. So it gives you that bell curve, sort of like, and it's one of those deals where it's more uniform and it stays down and it fishes very well. And then to put it to an equivalent, the sink 2-4 is equivalent to, say, like the Mao 5 and 5 float sink T11. That's pretty much the equivalent.
Today's episode is sponsored by Togens Fly Shop. Togens Fly Shop provides superior quality products at a great price. They have also a great YouTube channel that you can check out right now with new fly tying tutorials each week. Togens also has you covered if you're looking for unique in-house products, and they also support many of the great brands out there that you know and trust. It's been fun connecting with Justin and the family over the years now, and it's been really cool. A great local fly shop. Togens is also offering their fly tying box, where they send out materials at a regular cadence where you don't even have to think of it. You just open the mailbox, and there's your Togens pack. And I recently made an order through Togens, and the experience is always perfect. They've got you covered if you ever have questions or need any help, whether that's a YouTube tutorial or connecting with them personally. Since 2005, Togens has been over-delivering on customer service, and it's time for you to check out Togens Buzz for yourself. You can head over to wetflyswing.com/Togens right now to check out their diverse selection of products today. You support this podcast by clicking through that link to Togens online. That's Togens, Togens. Okay, back to the show. So that kind of covers the gear again, and it's great because it was fun fishing it. And there were some slots that were, tighter in. I think of another one we had, one of the rivers we fished where we had with Jim and, and Josh, and we kind of took turns. We were just sitting there chit-chatting, and one person got in and hit a fish. And then I think we almost swapped twice, went through that. I mean, that was pretty, for me and probably for everybody, that was a pretty epic day as well. Are those days with the right conditions, that's not abnormal for what you guys do up there?
No, not at all. Once you find, you're hoping for that water to be super high like that, to take them, to have those fish in those transition areas on those flats and those little teeny ledges that if you were to see what that looks like today.
Yeah, what would that look like?
No water.
Oh, really? So you couldn't even you wouldn't even be fishing that spot?
Well, you could see to the bottom. So right after you left, the bottom dropped out, and literally you could see bottom in every single one of those runs that we fished.
Oh, wow.
So there is a musical shell game of like water level going up and down of what these fish use. It's just all about speed and temperature, and are they on the move? So that's pretty cool too. So this is one thing we should I want you to say, is that we were using 20-pound SA fluorocarbon as our leader material, and you saw that it was plenty clear enough, and we could put to closure that people, I can understand in some situations where they want to line down, but did you feel that at any point that hindered your success?
No, so that was 20-pound. That was our tip, our line. Yeah, it was like basically, like you said on before, 16 inches, 14 inches, but I think sometimes we were using 20, but it was short tips of 20-pound fluorocarbon. No, I didn't. It was just like I was using. Typically, I might use 8-pound, 10-pound, just maxima, right? 12-pound, whatever. So 20-pound fluoro just seemed like it was exactly the same, right? Turning things over. And I guess it's probably better a little bit too for turning flies over maybe.
Yeah, right. And if you don't want to use a net, and you can grab the line and just bring the fish in and keep it all in the water without banging it up in the net and the rocks, which, but let's say, so in the Deschutes, would you say you would have to line down like on a summer run?
I probably not, I wouldn't be as worried about the sort of spooking them, but it would be just on the action, right? So I'm not sure, what would that 20-pound fluorocarbon with the action, does that give it lots of movement, like sort of thing? Because that's one of the things there, is that we don't necessarily want a ton of action. We want to know exactly where that fly is, that it's right on the end of that tip, right?
Right. Yeah. I think I would line down on the Deschutes myself. I would lengthen up my leader for sure, and I would line down because it's crystal clear. From my experience, you might line down, but I would still make sure it's strong enough that just in case you happen to connect with one of those B runs, you don't have an industrial accident, right?
No, exactly. That's never fun. And we didn't have too many well, we had probably a few, but on the trip, because you were there, did we have any this week?
We did have only a few bring us to our knees, like where they just ripped it in the big boil with Nicole.
Oh, yeah.
We both were just like, oh my goodness. Like, we wish we would have seen that fish type deal. But that happens, right? That happens.
Yeah, that's it. Cool. So I'm glad you said that. So 20-pound fluorocarbon, we were using that as our tip, and our tip bits were like, what were they? Yeah, they're pretty much in that 20-inch range, right? Somewhere in there.
Yeah, right. We fished anywhere from, I would say 2 foot to 14 inches, depending on the lip and the ledges and stuff. We kept it pretty close.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't say enough about, we could sit here and go. The great thing about this is that when we first went into this, Jeff, we were like, okay, if this trip, even if it's a total failure, it's going to be so amazing because we're going to get a fish together. And now circling back, we're sitting here talking again, away, across the country, but we fished together, you know what I mean? And for me, that was what it was all about, that and connecting with everybody on the trip. I mean, how's it look for you when you look at this thing we did? It was a little bit new, you put a lot, I will say, let me give it props to you. You were like so well and above, far and above, like the effort you put into this was as high as it gets. And I think that says a lot about you and, who you are. But, I mean, how does it look to you? Does it look like, obviously there's a lot of work there, but does this look like something you would be good doing again?
Oh, absolutely. Hats off to you, because you're probably one of the first West Coast anglers to basically, break the bridge of Midwest to West Coast. And I'm sure that it's going to be like, we're going to do this multiple times, again, as a class, and just, you're going to come out and fish and explore this area again. But the camaraderie of getting, X amount of people, 7, 8, 10 people underneath the same roof, and watching them like interact with like tying flies, and they were almost like networking, teaching each other. And I think that was such a valuable tool. Is like, you have Josh from Minnesota, then you've got Nicole, who's diverse in Atlantic salmon, and they were chit chatting and sharing things in the evening. It was unbelievable how the spey community family, they just mesh and just have such great camaraderie. There's no, hey, I'm better than you. And I think that, to me, and watching your face, like when you get that grab and I hear this, oh my, blank, 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 that's what impacts me, right?
Yeah.
Or just watching somebody when they swing and you say, hey, it's going to happen now. And the rod just gets pulled out of their hand. You're like, oh my goodness. It's worth every minute of planning that me and you did.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think that is the thing. I mean, everybody there, and I remember Jim the last day, I mean, he was up there. I think he got a fish, but then he was almost acting like as our guide. I mean, it just shows you, right? He was up there like coaching, talking to Nicole and letting people, everybody go through. So, and I really, ultimate, and I'm going to do at the end of this, it's going to be cool because we did that fireside chat. I'm going to put in the audio file for that and what the trip meant to everybody that was there. But one person who wasn't there on that fireside chat was Boris. And I want to give Boris a big shout out because, I mean, that guy, first of all, was amazing. He was there like a day or so, and then he had kind of a health injury and he had to leave. And he came to me that morning and said, Dave, I got to leave, but I appreciate every minute of this. This has been, and so talk about that with Boris, because I know you know him a little bit. It seems like everybody was similar to Boris. I mean, was this just a unique thing that we lucked out and had this amazing group of people, or is it just, like you said, is this just the community that we're in?
I think it's just a community we're in. And, as far as Boris, you won't find a gentler, kinder soul on planet Earth. He's the ultimate, like, client. He's the ultimate friend. He doesn't put value on catching a fish. He puts value on the experience of the day and maybe improving his casting and a few tips, and then sharing what he knows and what his passion is to others. But yeah, you won't find anybody nicer to spend the day on the water with. And it's very sad that he had a little bit of health that came in unexpectedly, but we will make it up to him tenfolds. And my prayers are out to him. He's actually doing okay, so which is good to know.
Good. That's good to hear. Yeah. We'll circle back around for sure with him. And then this trip, I mean, we've had a couple of these episodes where we've talked about this, and we're going to have more because I think, for what we're doing here, it's like you are very good about, getting into these tips and some of the stuff that we don't think about. What are, on that week, anything else we want to kind of just give a shout out to as far as if somebody's listening here and they're thinking about putting a trip together to that part of Steelhead Alley? I mean, because you have Ohio, you kind of also have Pennsylvania and even New York, right? But your focus for the most part is Ohio. Is that pretty much 90% of your time there?
It is. I've tried to narrow it down, and I've actually like really trying to focus on like catching them out in the lake, stripping streamers along with the swung fly. But I think you have to look at the Great Lakes area as a whole, because you have ground-fed streams in Michigan where you're actually spey casting off of a boat all day. You've got wild fisheries that are over in New York that are off the Cattaraugus. So you could even swing flies from shore on the Niagara River. So it would probably take you your lifetime, like myself, to explore it all. But they all have their own unique characteristics. But I will say, planning a trip, be expected to be mobile. Like at any given time, you might say, I want to fish Ohio, but you might have to cross the border to PA where the water conditions are a little bit better. and deal with, a higher angler count per acre of running water. You could also, like we talked about, is maybe this next class is we're not just going to stay in Ohio. We might start in New York and work our way up into Michigan and end up the class in like a multi, like Steelhead bus school or something, load up in a big van and just, because it's all different, Dave, and it's pretty cool. Just like your fishers are all different, correct?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, this is great. I love that you brought that up because it just everything kind of comes together. The school, right, is it's kind of a marketing piece, but it really is about a school. It's about teaching and taking a little more than just a guide trip, right? Just a 1-day guide trip. But the bus analogy is funny too because right, let's hop on the school bus and let's take a tour around Steelhead Alley because I mean that sounds really amazing. We had our Ohio. I could spend another week there easy. But I'd love to fish Pennsylvania. I'd love to fish New York, Michigan, right? Everything. I mean, all the stuff. So I'm going to put a shout out and we'll have this in the show notes, wetflyswing.com/steelhead school. We'll have a link there where people can sign up if they want, or if they're interested in this, and at least it gets them in because I know some of the people that were on this trip are coming back probably next year. So there's going to be limited slots, but we're going to do this again. And for those that are listening now that want to get involved in this, and we'll have more information on what that looks like, but I like it. So we start with a bus and we kind of hit a different river depending on the conditions, right? So we just spread it out a little bit.
Yeah, right. That's what I like to do is I have no agenda. Like you look at the flows and you say, okay, we're in New York, what's available? And if, whatever river's available, we're going to work with the outfitters and guides that are in that area and let them make the choices and to just see, what the day brings, right? Just like you saw, it's like every day was a new adventure. Like, oh, we're going to go here, we can go over there. We all spread out, right? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, good. And so you mentioned outfitters. Let's just dig into that just for a second, give a shout out to everybody because we started with the bag. The bag was gone. I had no clothes, so I had to literally go out and get clothes. We stopped by the Backpackers. Talk about that place because I know you have a connection with them, and then talk about a few of the other folks that helped us out there along the way.
Yeah, so we get off the plane and you get off the plane, no luggage. And then my home shop, the backpacker shop, which is noted for more of a soft goods and backpacking and outdoor shop, but it has a wonderful fly fishing community center in the back. And I grew up with the owner, Reece Fabbro. So we walk in there and was like, help. And so literally, you ended up getting some swag money from the airplane guys, and then he ends up giving you his waders. We used his waders, brand new Patagonias, and you ended up getting, using some of my boots that had studs because it was slippery as the dickens. And thanks to him, because he ends up setting us up. And then Dan at Chagrin River Outfitters runs just a really good outfitting guiding service. He does, a daily basis. He can have anywhere from 1 to 5 guides on the water, and they do a really outstanding job. They were there every day on point. No, like, I'm late. And their personalities, just even on a slow fishing day, which, as you know, can get pretty slow swinging flies, they were able to maintain top level entertainment, which really helped out.
It did. It did. They were all, Dan and Mike and Justin, right, were the 3 folks we had. And then we also had Jerry, which was awesome because we had him on the podcast a while back. So Jerry was there. That was pretty cool as well. He helps you out occasionally when you get kind of events like this.
He does. Yeah. Jerry is retired, sales rep in fly fishing, 40 plus years in the fly fishing industry, but now is more noted as an author now. And then he helps out a lot with me, even for like the basic fly fishing classes, because he's just, wonderful caster and a wealth of knowledge that me and you can both only wish we knew about fly fishing. So it was a great asset to have JD on board, and just he was sort of our anchor person, like fly tying and just chit chatting and taking Nicole to Pennsylvania. And it was just great.
Yeah, it was. And that's Jerry Darkus. So we've had him on. I'll put a link to the episode we had with him quite a while ago. Let's dig in really quickly to flies because we have, we've used a bunch of different things and you've always had tube flies, shanks, there's all sorts of things. Talk about, let's say again, somebody's out there and right now I guess we're in December, so things are slowing down right a little bit. What does that look like? Let's dig in that real quick, then we'll get to flies. So as far as the seasons, as we speak, we're the week before Christmas. Is fishing still possible over there or what's that look like?
Yep. So the window's going to close Thursday night. And this is very traditional. I would say from Thanksgiving to the second week of December is like pretty classic time to go. And Mother Nature dictates it. But Thursday night's going down to 15 degrees. And we got the teens going to be at least for 3 or 4 days. So the rivers are actually going to slush over, Dave. There won't be any fishing. But up until then, we've got, high 30s. Today I'm off just because it's a high of 31, and who wants to like dig ice out of their guides all day? But we're going to have a window starting again Sunday a little bit, and then Monday not, but then Tuesday, Wednesday's the pick days. But then after that, it's going to be sort of like a day by day watch the weather. And we could actually have a freeze up for 2 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we could actually say there's no fishing here until the middle of February. But as you know, climate change, we've been pretty blessed of getting some thaws. And then it could be, I'll pick up the phone and say, you need to get here now. So until the second or third week of February, it's sort of a hit or miss, play the weather game.
Gotcha. So that's the cool thing about what you have going, or maybe even somebody who's listening, if they're out around, they want to do this, they could potentially call you and say, hey, I want to do a trip. And then you could like give somebody a heads up and be like, okay, it's a go time, and just come up and do it now.
Yeah, I call it on the bench. I probably got 3 or 4, right now that's sort of on the bench for January, February. And if we see temperatures that are going to be in the mid to upper 30s or like low 40s, we'll be on it like a monkey on a banana.
Yeah. Awesome. And then when does it pop back out where things are like, okay, we're kind of go time again, it's open? When's that happen?
I would say it could be anywhere from the 1st of March, but traditionally we've had some colder Marches and warmer falls. So I would say March 12th is my window of when I would say it's ready to go. That's like for sure what I've seen lately.
Today's episode is sponsored by Zag.Fish, who was founded with the idea of finding ethical solutions to fly tying products and services. They've done just that by creating jobs for marginalized people, both in the U.S. and abroad. They've got everything covered. We've had a recent episode on with John Grosta, who talked about some of the great products they have with the fishing he does in Florida with the Fairflies brushes. They've got the 5D brushes and their fly fur, which is pretty amazing. Tons of people are loving this stuff for its durability and the speed that allows you to tie flies. John talked about that on the podcast, and he said that just basically it's going to add on at least 15 to 20 minutes to each fly you tie if you're not using these brushes. Zag also has Wasatch custom angling tools in their satchel with over 50 custom heirloom tools that go along with your materials. So they are a true do-it-yourself company, and you got to check out Zag.Fish right now. If you want to, you can head over to wetflyswing.com/Zag, and you can get 20% off your first order by clicking through that link, and let them know you heard of them through this podcast, and you'll get that 20% discount right now. That's wetflyswing.com/Zag, Z-A-G. Okay, back to the show. And are you guys now, when you turn around the corner, so we were hitting it towards the end, right? December. So in March, what's that look like? I mean, our steelhead, is that still an equal sort of thing fishing? I'm not even sure on that end.
Yeah, so basically we were fishing for winter fall run fish, and they were actually, a few fish were done spawning already that we didn't encounter, but they were in the river system. But most of those fish will be gone, and then we get a spring run, which Ohio in previous years, Little Manistee and stuff, that we have a pretty good spring run. And it's good swing fishing up until I would say April, when these fish decide to try to spawn on the gravel. And then you can still do it then, because at that point you're going to have some residual fish that are done spawning that are holding in the runs, and you don't have to rake gravel or anything. You can still swing a fly in the runs for the drop back fish. But by the end of April, going into Mother's Day, most people sort of forget this area, but I'll go on record that if you want to catch one on the dry fly, or you want to catch a lake run smallmouth, and you're not opposed to catching downstreamers, it's a great time to do it, because a lot of people are focused on warm water fish in their houses and stuff. And there's a pretty good window, as long as the water temperatures stay below 68 and hover in those low 60s, it could be phenomenal fishing.
Oh, wow. So there's your chance to get to maybe skate up a steelhead or some other species.
Correct. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. So when do you, on your program, so you've got this big boat, right? So you're out there in the lake, which again, we've been talking about the rivers, but the Great Lakes, obviously, I mean, this is a pretty spectacular, flying in and on the airplane. It's my first time. This is my first time in the Great Lakes, and flying over the lakes, and it's just like, right, it's this whole another world. But talk about that. What do you got going with your boat program?
So, I'm a guy like you. I love to keep exploring and that. And I try to stay in the river as long as I can, but I will go on record that at ice out coming in around April, some of the best fishing is on the big lake. A lot of seasons are closed, but there are some seasons that we're allowed to fish pre-spawn fish, and it's some great fishing. Like smallmouth and the steelhead are starting to, they filter outside the harbors. And I can't tell you, there's almost every species that swims we could probably target. And I'm not have it completely dialed in. I do pretty good. But by May, I'm on the lake full time, and the rivers are they're warmer, the bass fishing are there. And so I'm out on the lake.
Yeah, it's really cool, the whole thing about that warm temperature, because these fish, yeah, I mean, they're not in there. So when you think of, and that's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm not even sure. So you think about these steelhead, right? So they come up in there, and these are essentially wild steelhead, right? Or talk about that a little bit, the hatchery versus wild. What's going on there?
Ohio really doesn't have any documented wild fish, which means, self-reproducing. I'm sure there's a few, but we in Michigan, there is a self-sustaining population in Michigan, Wisconsin, and New York. Pennsylvania probably has a few, but it's undocumented. But the Canadian shoreline of Lake Erie, there is a wild population up on the Grand River on the north shores of Lake Erie that's documented up on the Grand. Larry Halick, the ex-biologist, they've documented that they're self-sustaining along with the hatchery program. But we're way over a 1.5 million, rainbow stocked with some steelhead background along the south shores of Lake Erie. So you can only imagine why we catch the catch rate we do.
Right. So basically, that's the thing. So they come in, like when we were there in December, they're coming in, but by the time you circle around, they're trying to maybe spawn in there a little bit. But for the most part, the water temperature is going to warm up in, the summertime too, warmer. There's no juvenile fish. There's nothing in that river that are of steelhead.
Correct. There are a few areas that the temperatures in some of the feeder creeks that are shaded, it's undocumented yet, Dave.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you get these fish are like, wait a minute, we got way too many fish, right, that are coming in. Just like the king salmon, basically up in the Michigan and Lake Huron, they weren't predicting so many naturally reproducing king salmon on the Canadian side, and it actually exploded, and the bait fish collapsed there. So it's a musical chair game of managing these hatcheries. But Ohio's only allowed to stock 400,000. That's our limit, which is still astronomical, right?
Right. So that's what's going on. So basically, each year they're stocking 400,000 fish out into these, well, in the rivers, essentially. Yeah, I guess there's a whole bunch of whole process here, but the point being is that there's a crap load of fish coming back.
That's what I understand. A crap load of fish. And I will say because of COVID, the Division of Wildlife for Ohio had to go researching in other directions to get the eggs. So we reached out to Wisconsin and New York and every place, and we got the Wisconsin strain that they're using, and they seem to be a little more grabby, I will say, than some of the other strains. And I'm not sure if it's just water flow. This part I'm not sure, but in general, some of us guides have realized that they're a little more grabby.
Yeah, that's it. And Wisconsin, well, I'm trying to think now. Josh, Wisconsin or Minnesota?
He's Minnesota, but he is fishing Wisconsin.
That's right. Essentially, some of the fish that he was catching in Ohio were probably kind of from the strain he knows of up in his hometown.
Yeah, absolutely. And, something to compare apples to apples. And, just like you with your hatchery program back and forth, sure, you see a little difference, right?
Yeah. Like I'm saying, that's for me, I have a home water here that's small, very similar to some of the small rivers we fished. And I'm excited. Well, that's the thing. So right now I'm in the lookout. So I got to get my gear together. I need to get 11.5 foot rod. Talk about that. So the 11.5 foot rod versus say a 12-foot rod, the shorter rod. So why the shorter rod in these strains? Why do you like the 11.5 foot, say, versus a 12 or even longer or shorter?
Well, if you can see the canopy, the backdrop in the trees behind you, and then maybe working underneath trees. I like it because the ratio of the newer Skagit heads, they keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter, right? Which means, your strokes compact, but that means your D loop doesn't have to be as large as you would be if you're fishing, say, a 40-foot plus head. Where the chute, you've got some room to open up, where you can see it can get pretty intimate on these little runoff streams or anywhere I fish, even in the OP or whatever, I can get underneath these tricky fishing situations and deliver a big payload. Is it going to be like a front of a catalog tight loop? No. But is it going to get out there and do the job? Absolutely. That's sort of why I like it. And good control. And, that little shorter rod, you could add some pretty serious pressure to those fish, just like that saltwater. So in general, I've gravitated to little shorter rods over the years.
Yeah, that's right. And it is nice. It's and yeah, you can cast, I mean, that shorter rod pretty much as far as you can the longer rod, right? Because everything's balanced and the head's shorter and things like that. But everything seems to work very similarly to if you had a longer Skagit or longer rod.
Yeah, absolutely. People think that a Skagit cast is a spey cast, and it's really not. It's a tactical two-handed cast. It's like casting a bullet, right? And if you got, a short grain or a long grain bullet, it doesn't matter. It's the same projectile. And Jerry French and some of the, the founders of all this, and Ward and all them guys, they frontiered it, and we've just sort of like basically jumped on their bandwagon and utilized their wealth of knowledge to our advantage, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing. And it's just perfectly for that, for your area. It's working well. Well, let's do a couple. I want to just take it out a little bit of a casting thing and then a little bit of the fishing part of it. So, we're sitting there. You came up. I was kind of having a couple of struggles getting things. Talk about that. When you came up there, you gave me a couple of tips that were part of on the kind of the swing through. I don't know if you remember that moment, but it helped quite a bit to get me thinking about some stuff I was doing wrong. First, do you find that that's an equal part of what you do as a guide out there, helping with the casting, and then talk about how you helped me there that day?
I think I'm probably noted more as like a hands-on instructor, and I'm a pretty good guide, but there's guides that are way better than myself. Not that I don't know the water, but I feel that, I really enjoy looking at somebody's casting, and each individual has their own personality and their own stroke, and I don't want to change it. Just point out little bullet points with their personality to improve their casting, where they don't wear themselves out, right? The one me and you talked about is that, when you make your lift, that's the most crucial part of the cast. And then the one I really like is everybody has a tendency after you make the lift and you make your set to your anchor. When you're clearing the line or sweeping, everybody has a tendency to use the top hand to pull it into the D loop rather than rotating the body. And I think that would be the number one thing, that is body rotation, that if you just let your body rotate and fill the D loop and raise the rod, that's going to be the entire cast. And if you just rotate your body, you could do it all day, 7 days a week, where if you pull in with your arm, fatigue is going to set in and your casting will definitely deteriorate as the day goes on. I think that's what we discussed when we were hanging out.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it was. So you're sitting there, your feet are pointing towards where you're going to cast and you're getting set up. You do your lift, you bring it through. And then after you bring it through, you set up your anchor. Instead of just moving your arms, which you could do, you can move your arms and then cast. You actually keep your arms stationary and move and swing rotate your body to get into the casting position. And then that sets you up for success. Basically, that sets up your D loop. That does everything, and then you just do everything the same, and that's what you gave me there. And again, it says one little tiny tip. I mean, that's actually a huge tip, but it got me thinking for the next rest of the day, rest of the trip, that I was always okay. And that's what's fun about spey. I think maybe that's probably just fly fishing, right? You can just work on one little thing and try to get that. You can spend a whole trip working on that.
Yeah. What do you think the first question is that I ask a client when we step into the water if I don't know them?
Oh, right. If you don't know them. Man, I don't know. I would say something, yeah, like casting. What would be, how comfortable are you with casting, or what's your spey look like?
Right. So my first question is, what is a spey cast? And then that gives them an idea. Then my second question, before we even wet a line, is where is the energy of a cast, a two-handed cast? And 99% of the time they say, oh, it's in the forward stroke, how hard I hit it. And I was like, well, when you relay it to say all of it energy stored in that D loop, and explain to them that without the D loop, the cast fails. And they're like, oh, and that the light bulb. And so for the rest of the day, I call it building the D loop. How do you build the D loop? And that's, once you get that, everything's downhill.
That's it. And that's the same thing for me, is that's one of my struggles. And we talked about that I wasn't building that D loop, and that was part of the thing. So that's always going to be something, something I'll work on here as well. And Josh, again, shout out to Josh, Larry the Lunker, because we had a little situation there at the car. Josh was this amazing, amazing guy. But he's a guide up there, right up north of you. But it was like, okay, what is a spey? What is a Skagit? And I think, he had a rough morning or a rough night before. Anyways, it was a great moment because, it is some people, everybody, like a lot of people think spey, Skagit, same thing. But really the difference is, give us that so we can get on record to talk about the spey versus Skagit. What is the difference?
So the spey cast has, it's a much larger line. There's a little bit of a pause because the line is longer. And when you sweep into the D loop, you have to pause to allow that length of line to form in the D loop, right? And the longer the line, there's a little more of a pause. And we're talking like split seconds, right?
Yeah.
But it's almost like slow motion. If you ever watch Spey-O-Rama, they punch it into the D loop and there's a little pause to that line form. But with the Skagit, it's pretty much just, low, high, go. Just keep things moving and just form that D loop, raise that rod, let the D loop pretty much form under the rod, and then just go ahead and make your forward stroke at the acceleration. I call Skagit casting like controlled chaos, rather than that waltz of dance, right? It's like you're throwing logging chain. It's not much taper to it. So you got to be a little more, I would say, deliberate with your moves, right? How would you consider that? Maybe what's your intake on that?
Yeah. I'm always thinking about that as like the transfer of energy. So I always feel like if I'm doing it smooth and transferring, and then the whole thing, right? Because that's where it breaks down for me when I'm not keeping it flowing. I'm stopping or something like that. So that definitely resonates for sure. And heavy. The idea being that you can cast heavy flies, although we weren't really casting. That's the cool thing about the Skagit stuff we were doing. We weren't really casting gigantic flies for the most part, right? So let's talk that fly just real quick as we start to take it out here. What were the flies typically, the style, the weight? Like, what did we have on there this week?
I think we had across the board, but in general, we had a fly that was probably in and around the length of, say 2.5 to 3.5 inches. We had perfect water conditions, so we didn't have to fish outside the box. And then as far as profile went, we did have larger profile flies. If you noticed it had a little bulk to it. Like you said, the egg sucking leech. Mike has, he uses the, Blaine Chocolate's body tubing and he props it up. One of my flies, I put like an ear plug in the middle just to give it the illusion of a profile, but yet make it easy to cast and shed water with the new synthetic materials. And Josh is, he was tying some epic flies, and then he sort of was doing like that 2-stage flies, but he always had a little hot spot in there, if you noticed, right?
Yep.
That orange, that seemed to be Halloween, I would say was one of our go-to. We had this discussion before, but that was one of the contrasting colors that is pretty go-to.
I love that. And I always love to give a shout out to my old man because, I think we had that conversation about the colors that night. And that was one of the cool things about the school is that we're all sitting around there in the evening and somebody has a question about, I think Boris brought up something about, the flies, and we started getting, okay, what is the color? What is your one go-to color? And orange is one of those ones that, my old man, that was a fly. He kind of, patterned on the Deschutes, the orange and black. And then it's also one that's just orange. It's like a fly. Red works too. It all works, but orange seems to be that one that's, I don't know. Why do you think that is? Why do you think orange is one of those colors?
I think it's just like the cat and mouse game, right? We can get a fish to move on it. We can also, if it's coming into their awareness zone and they're like, I'm not having it, we push them back, and then eventually we might get a territorial strike out of it. Do we really know what they think orange is? I don't know, but I go back into the classic fly patterns that always had the hot spot tagged ends, right?
Oh yeah.
In the butt,
Yep.
So I feel that somewhere either that chartreuse or fluorescent oranges, it's sort of like the signal light fly, right? Just, hey, here I am, eat it, Joe's. I'm going to see, let me taste this. Let me see what it is type deal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, the classic, if you go back to the classic, like wet flies, whether it's the Max Canyon, the Signal Light, the green butt skunk,
Right.
they all had that little tag. Well, it's more than a tag. It was a butt end of them. But now, like with the stuff we're using, it's not really the butt necessarily. It's more kind of the egg sucking. Do you think that matters? Why, say, the egg sucking versus a splash in the butt?
I think the way we tie it, how we tie it, reverse tie, and it's, our classic egg sucking leech was always with the chenille. Now we're using it with synthetic ice dubbing and laser dubbing and stuff, and it's a bigger head. And I do think everybody says, oh, it's pushing water because they can feel it. Well, I'm not a belief in this pushing water, they can feel it. I believe that it keeps the fly moving in the slower water pockets. And then when it hits the faster pockets, it kicks a little more and it gets a little more action. Then when it gets into those tanky, greasy, basically couchy waters where those fish are laying, it has a little more like movement to it. It doesn't lay on the bottom like a shank would. So I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, that's right. So shanks versus tube. Let's go there just for a second because we use both, definitely the tubes. What is your go-to? I mean, do you use both, one or the other?
I do. So if the water has some soul to it on the dangle, meaning that if I can keep that fly up off the bottom and let it marinate in these colder water temperatures that we were fishing, if there has some soul to it, I can get away with a shank. Or if I see a ledge that I want to drop off and get into a bucket, I will use a shank even with some weight on it. But if it's more of a classic that I've got time to set up and then the hang down is going to be really lazy, feel that an unweighted tube fly, it just stays like up in their zone rather than laying on the bottom like a shank would. It's not like a West Coast, your rivers have soul right to the bank. So it's sort of a different thought process with Ohio.
That's cool. Yeah, so that's it. It's the real, what do you want that fly to do? And you definitely don't want that fly sitting on the bottom. I mean, that's like, those fish are down there, but they're definitely looking up, right? They're not looking down.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, this has been another awesome one. I think, we've touched on a few tips. I think the trip, again, I wanted to, kind of circle up. I want to have here in a second, we're going to add the audio, like we said, of just everybody in the group. And we'll let everybody else tell their story of what the trip meant to them. I mean, for me, I think I said it meant, me connecting with you, connecting with your whole crew out there, right? Getting to the Great Lakes and just saying, hey, is this something we want to do again? And there's no question that this is for sure an annual thing, something that I'm going to be looking forward to. Anything else before we get out here? I'm not sure when we're going to do the next one. I mean, I know we're going to do more podcasts with you, but between now and maybe the next Steelhead School, do you want to give any shout out to anything else you have going just, between now and then?
No, I mean, I think right now we've had quite a few podcasts. I'd like, if anybody has any questions about lines or any rods or anything, feel free to reach out to Dave and I. And I'm sure if we don't know the answer, we can definitely get the answers for your area or whatever. I really greatly appreciate the listen. And mainly too, Dave, is just thanks for everybody who basically just said, hey, we're going to take a stab at this school. I just want to thank all my mentors over the years that, taught me everything from day one and put me where I'm at now for my learning curve. I just greatly appreciate everybody from West Coast to East Coast to the Midwest. That's about it. And you for coming out.
For sure. Yeah, this is I'm excited about it. I'm excited to tell more of the stories I find myself doing that on another podcast, right? I'm sitting there and of course it was an epic trip. So I find myself telling stories around that, and we're going to have more of those as we go because we shed light on some of them, but you know what I mean? We didn't get them all out there. So I think as we go, we'll talk more about it, and then we'll just look forward to catching up with you here as we start to get ready. Again, it's going to be the new year, and we're probably in a few months going to be thinking about, okay, let's make sure we're planned and ready to go for Steelhead School, 2023.
Yep, it's penciled in already.
It is. We already got it in. We just got to get the school. We got to find the school bus, then we'll be good to go.
I'm going to buy one next week.
All right, Jeff, thanks for all the time.
You too, Dave. Thanks, man.
All right, so Dave here, Wet Fly Swing Podcast. Fireside Chat with Dave is what this is. Which is perfect. I mean, the fact that we have a fire here is pretty much. So we're going to do a quick little wrap up with everybody who was on the Steelhead School on the trip here. And we're going to talk about just whatever comes to your mind about something you remember. Maybe you will remember from this trip or anything. We're going to start with Jim here.
So yeah, this is probably one of the best Steelhead trips I've ever been on. And, learning about the rivers in Ohio and learning the tricks of the trade and the waters and all the little hints that, it takes forever to really learn. It was like, I kind of said it before, it's almost like 5 years of knowledge, of hard knowledge, smashed into four days. And just really excited to be here and had a great time. And fishing with Jeff and Justin and Mike and all the different guides that know the area and have learned all that. It's been quite a great experience, and thanks for putting it all together, and love to do it again, and I recommend it to anybody that is interested in swinging flies for a steelhead. It's pretty amazing.
There you go. Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Bill?
I probably had my what's going to be my fondest steelhead remembrance ever, because the run by the bridge where Jeff said, okay, you're right there. There's got to be a fish there. You're right there. And I'm thinking, great, Jeff. So if I don't catch this fish, whose fault is that? But sure enough, the fish was right where Jeff said it was. I hooked it, and then I thought, well, now I have about 7 people, including several certified experts, a video camera, a professional photographer, and I'm standing there fighting this fish thinking, please stay on. If I don't catch another fish in my life, I need this fish. Because I cannot take you turn around and there's always that look on the guide's face like, oh, that's okay, we'll get the next one. Yeah. And I could not have stood it. So I'll remember that probably forever.
I'll remember that too. I was there, I saw that.
Oh yeah, I told my wife, it's like, I'm not a real public person, but to turn around and there's all these people watching, and it's like, okay, now you have to do your thing. You talk about it, you think about it, but now you got to perform.
Amazing.
So that was my fondest memory of the trip so far.
Awesome.
It's been great.
Thanks, Bill. All right, Randy?
For me, it's a bucket list trip, learning, meeting new people, new experiences, new friends. And I've enjoyed every minute of it, even when it was painful.
First, I'd like to thank Dave and Jeff and all the other guides, Jerry Dark, Dan Pribanic as well, and Justin Pribanic. And I only started steelheading this April on the Lake Ontario trips on the Canadian side, and I drove 6.5 hours to be here. And you know what? It was everything. It exceeded my expectations. And I had an amazing time, and the fishing was spectacular. We lucked out with the weather. And, like Jim said, there's just so much learning. And it wasn't just from the guides. We supported each other, and, everybody was sharing tips. And it was an amazing experience. I think it was my best fishing trip ever. And, thank you all for this. Just loved it.
The last few days have been epic. I flew out here from Minneapolis, not knowing what to expect with the weather and the river levels and it being cold. And it turns out this time of year in Ohio, the steelhead are really putting the feed bags on. I was not expecting for kind of everyone, the whole group as a whole, to get that many grabs and connections and some awesome fish the entire time. All the guides were incredible. It was awesome, meeting Jerry Darkus and Jeff Liskay and Dave and everyone here, really. The food was incredible. We had a chef, Tyler, who kind of knocked it out of the park, with every meal, and everything was taken care of. From a hospitality standpoint, like top-notch. I definitely want to come and do this again next year for sure. Learned a lot as far as casting goes and improving my own casting game and just watching and learning different techniques from everyone else. And it's been a great trip. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, Dave, I'd like to really thank you. You're probably the first, I would say, host or angler, or I would say celebrity that comes to the Midwest. Normally it's divided, like Midwest, West Coast, right? But you came here and you probably had some, unexpected things that happened, like, wow, this is true. You hear stories, right? But it is. And it's not always good fishing. It's always not good weather, but it's not like that everywhere, right? But I want to thank everybody who joined us this week. Their skill sets were unbelievable. The personalities all got along. And I'm really looking forward to doing this with you, Dave, again. And just hats off for you to come on out. And I think we learned from you, and we learned from everybody here, So looking forward for it next year, maybe.
All right. And everybody said it all tonight. I'll follow up a little more with it. But for me, it's hard to say because this has been such a build-up since the first episode we did, 255, a couple years ago, and all the people before. Pete Humphreys. Yes. I listened to that episode this week, episode 7, 5 years ago almost, to your mentor, one of your mentors. Yeah. I had him on the podcast, and I think that's maybe where I tracked you down. It might have been from Pete, right? Yeah. So, I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for, kind of just jumping in and, really taking a chance, right? You never know. You kind of trust, I trusted, I knew, Jeff, your reputation. That's what I was going by. I wanted to make an opportunity, experience for everybody that would be, second and, and it is. It's been everything I expected and more. So thanks everyone for coming, and I am excited for 2023. So there it is. wetflyswing.com/399. 399 is going to get you some show notes, some links, some of the other good stuff we talked about today, and a good chance to take this episode a little bit further. Quick listener shout out before we get out of here. Domingo from San Antonio, Texas. We're giving a shout out to Domingo, member society shout out. He's been supporting this podcast in the past, and I just want to give Domingo a shout out as we're rolling around to some of the people who have connected with us earlier on, getting this thing rolling, and want to say appreciate Domingo if you're listening today in advance. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, a good way to do it is to click over through our sponsors' websites. That's the easiest way to click there, check out what they have going. If you have a chance to purchase, I want to thank you in advance and let you know you're supporting small businesses, this podcast, all in one easy click. If you have an idea for a show topic, you can check with me anytime, Dave at wetflyswing.com or on social. Let me know. I'd love to hear what you have going. And if you've been listening, you haven't connected with me yet, now's your shot. Now's your shot. You can give it a shot right now and let me know you're listening. And I'll try to put together an episode for you. I likely will put together an episode if you check in with me. All right, we're getting out of here. But before we do, I want to see what we have going up next, what we have coming up next, going down next. Next on the docket, we got, what are we at? I mean, we're 399. So we got a powerful episode on Tuesday. Powerful episode on Tuesday. It's our 400th, and we're doing something unique on Tuesday. So check that out. We're a little celebration to some people out there who have been important to this country. I'm going to get out of here. It is, it's in the evening. It's not super late yet, but I'm going to let you know, and I wish that you have a good evening, a good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And I thank you for connecting with us today. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.